The sun had barely risen when Michael Evans stepped into his office, a place he had once filled with optimism. Now, it was a cavern of silence, the air thick with the weight of financial collapse. The phone rang, a cruel reminder that things were no longer under control. He glanced at the screen, his heart sinking. Claire Westfield, the investor he had trusted, had withdrawn the funding that was supposed to secure the future of his startup. "This is just the beginning," he muttered under his breath. Each decision he had made in the last few months had led him to this moment, a moment where his empire was crumbling before his eyes. His employees, his clients, and even his family were waiting for him to save them. But how could he save them when he couldn't even save himself? Desperation clawed at him, but there was no time to waste. He had to act, and fast. Claire's betrayal cut deeper than anything. She had promised him everything, only to leave him with nothing. This wasn't just business, it was personal. His entire future, built on dreams and sacrifice, now hung in the balance. He knew what he had to do next. It would either make him or break him, but there was no turning back. Later that day, Michael met with Henry Collins, his mentor and the man who had once helped him rise to the top. "This isn't over, Mike," Henry had said, his voice gruff but steady. "But you have to face the facts. You're on the edge, and if you don't pull yourself together, this could be the end of everything." Michael looked out of the window, taking in the view of the city that once felt so full of promise. The light outside seemed harsh now, almost as if mocking him. Henry sat across from him, watching him carefully. "I've seen men break at moments like this," he continued. "But you can't afford to break. You're running out of time." Michael felt his stomach knot. Henry's words felt like a cold slap, but they were true. Claire had taken everything, but there was still a chance, a slim one, to salvage something. But only if he acted fast, and with no room for mistakes. Michael paced back and forth, running his hands through his hair, as the weight of Henry's words lingered. "What's the next step?" he finally asked, his voice tinged with frustration. Henry didn't hesitate. "You need to go to Claire. Get back in the game." Michael stopped in his tracks, staring at him in disbelief. "You want me to beg?" he asked, his tone sharp. Henry stood up, walking toward the window, where the fading light cast long shadows across the room. "Not beg, Mike. Persuade. You need to show her you're still in control." Michael clenched his fists, the thought of facing Claire again feeling like a punishment he wasn't ready for. "You don't know what she's done," Michael muttered, his words barely audible. Henry turned back to face him, his gaze hardening. "I've been where you are. You think it's over, but it's not. Not until you let it be. Go get what's yours." Michael nodded, his resolve hardening. It was time to play his last card. Michael arrived at Claire's office later that afternoon. The door to her office was slightly ajar, and through the crack he could see her sitting behind her desk, reviewing documents. When she saw him standing in the doorway, her expression shifted from professional detachment to something colder, more dismissive. "You've come to beg, haven't you?" she asked, her voice laced with sarcasm. Michael stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "I didn't come here to beg, Claire," he said, his voice steady. "I came here to remind you who built this empire." Claire leaned back in her chair, studying him with a calculating gaze. "You think I owe you something?" she asked, her voice now colder than before. "You've been riding high for too long, Michael. The game is over." Michael's heart raced, but he refused to show it. "Not yet," he replied, his words filled with determination. "This isn't over until I say it is." The silence between them was thick, broken only by the soft hum of the city outside. The confrontation with Claire didn't go as Michael had hoped. Her words echoed in his mind long after he left her office. "The game is over," she had said, as if everything they had built together meant nothing. Michael's world felt like it was crashing down around him. With nowhere else to turn, he went back to his office, the familiar space now feeling foreign and hostile. He sat at his desk, his thoughts swirling. He had tried to salvage his empire, but now it seemed like even that was slipping away. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Sophia, his trusted sidekick and longtime friend. "You okay?" she asked softly as she stepped inside. Michael looked up, offering a weak smile. "Yeah, just processing everything." Sophia took a seat across from him, her expression sympathetic but firm. "You're not alone in this, Mike. We'll figure something out. We always do." Michael didn't have the heart to tell her that it felt different this time. This time he wasn't sure there was a way out. Michael sat across from Claire at her sleek conference table, the atmosphere tense with unspoken words. "I thought we had an understanding," Michael said, his voice firm but edged with disbelief. Claire leaned back in her chair, her fingers drumming on the polished wood. "You were always too naive, Michael," she replied, her gaze never leaving his. "You knew the risks, but you couldn't handle them." Michael's heart clenched at her words, a bitter realization settling in. She wasn't the ally he once believed her to be. "I built everything from the ground up," Michael shot back, leaning forward. "And I'm not giving up on it now." Claire's lips curled into a cold smile. "It's not about giving up, Michael. It's about survival. You need to adapt. And I've made sure I'm on the winning side." She slid a contract across the table, a final cold offer. "Sign, and I'll reconsider my decision. Refuse, and it's over." The contract felt like a noose around his neck. He couldn't trust her anymore, but the offer was tempting. He hesitated, his fingers brushing the paper, torn between pride and desperation. Michael left Claire's office with the weight of her words crushing him. She had exposed the fragility of his position, and now he had no choice but to consider her terms. He needed money, yes, but at what cost? As he walked down the hallway, his phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from Josh, his longtime friend and business partner. "Meet me at the office. We need to talk." Michael's stomach twisted. The last few days had been filled with tension between them. Something felt off, but he ignored the nagging feeling and headed to the office. When he arrived, Josh was sitting at his desk, looking uncharacteristically pale. "I don't know how to say this, Mike," Josh started, his voice low. Michael frowned. "What's going on?" Josh hesitated. "I've been talking to Claire. She's got her own plans, Mike. Michael's heart skipped a beat. "You're working with her?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Josh avoided his gaze, confirming Michael's worst fear. "I didn't want to, but she made me an offer I couldn't refuse." Betrayal burned through Michael, but he kept his cool. "You're out of the picture, Josh. I don't need you anymore." Michael stormed out of the office, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the hallway. As he made his way back to his own space, the realization of Josh's betrayal settled in. How had he missed the signs? How had he trusted someone who now seemed to be working against him? He couldn't afford to waste time. As he sat at his desk, he scanned through his options. The phone call he needed to make was clear. He had to reach out to someone who could help him navigate the financial mess he was now in. He dialed Henry's number, his hands trembling slightly. "Mike." Henry's voice crackled through the phone, low and cautious. "What's going on?" Michael took a deep breath. "Claire has betrayed me, Henry. She's working against me now. Josh too. I don't know what to do anymore." There was a long pause before Henry responded. "You've got to be careful. The higher the stakes, the more dangerous this gets." Michael's frustration grew. "I don't need caution, Henry. I need a solution." Henry sighed. "All right, I'll help, but it's not going to be easy." A week later, Michael found himself standing in front of the one place he never thought he'd return to, Claire's office. The financial situation was worse than ever. He had no choice but to swallow his pride. He had tried everything else, and it was clear that Claire was the only person who could help him at this point. As he entered her office, Claire was already sitting behind her desk, her expression unreadable. "You came back," she said, her voice flat. "I didn't have a choice," Michael replied, walking towards her. "I need your help." Claire raised an eyebrow. "Help? After everything?" Michael nodded, a bitter taste in his mouth. "You're my last option." She leaned forward, her eyes glinting with something unreadable. I'll help, but there's a price. And this time, it's not just money. You'll owe me more than you think. Michael's mind raced. He didn't like the sound of it, but he had no choice. What's the price? He asked, his voice steady despite the fear creeping in. Claire smiled, and for the first time it didn't seem friendly. You'll find out soon enough. That night, Michael sat in his office, reviewing the deal Claire had presented to him. The terms were harsh, but he had no other options left. His thoughts swirled as he went over the fine print. Every clause felt like a trap, each word heavier than the last. He thought about everything he had worked for, the empire he had built, the sacrifices he had made. Was it worth it? Was it worth selling his soul to save his business? A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Sophia entered, her face pale, her expression serious. You look terrible, she said softly. Michael smiled weakly. It's the price of survival. She walked over and sat across from him. You've made some bad decisions, Mike, but this isn't you. Michael's eyes flicked up to meet hers. I don't have a choice. I'm not the same person anymore. Sophia's face softened. You still have a choice. But this won't fix everything. It'll just delay the inevitable. Michael ran a hand through his hair, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Then maybe it's time to face the inevitable. The tension in Michael's office was palpable. After Claire's betrayal, things had only gotten worse. He had no choice but to make a risky move. He had a new opportunity, one that might turn everything around. A high-stakes investment in a volatile tech startup. His heart raced as he reviewed the figures on his screen. It was a calculated gamble, one that could either save or destroy everything he'd worked for. He needed cash, and fast, but this was a dangerous game. He thought about his employees, his family, and the future of the business. If it failed, everything would be gone. His hands trembled as he hit enter, sending the funds into the startup. This has to work, he whispered to himself. Michael knew that the next 24 hours would define his future. There was no turning back. He'd either rise from the ashes or be swallowed by the flames. The next day, Michael met with Sophia in the conference room. She sat across from him, her face serious. You've lost your mind, Mike. This deal could tank everything. Are you sure about this? Michael's jaw tightened as he leaned forward, his eyes locked on her. I don't have a choice, Sophia. If I don't take this risk, we're done. Everything is on the line. Sophia hesitated, her fingers tapping nervously on the table. But what if it's not enough? What if it blows up in your face? Michael shook his head, frustration bubbling up. I'll deal with that when it happens. But right now I have to believe in something. She stood up and walked over to the window, staring out at the city below. I get it. But just remember, Mike, there's no coming back from this. Her words hung in the air, the weight of her caution settling in his chest. He knew she was right, but he couldn't stop now. Too much was at stake. That afternoon, Michael's phone rang. It was Henry. Mike, I've got some bad news. Henry's voice was gravelly, tired. What is it? Michael asked, dread creeping into his chest. The startup you invested in, it's in trouble. The CEO's been cooking the books. Michael's heart sank. What the hell are you talking about? You're sure about this? Henry didn't hesitate. I've seen the numbers, Mike. It's a fraud. If you've put money into it, you need to pull out fast. Panic surged through Michael, and his mind raced. I can't pull out now, Henry. The deal's already been made. If I pull out, we lose everything. Henry's voice softened. Sometimes losing a little can save you a lot. Trust me. Michael ended the call, his hand trembling as he stared at the phone screen. He had been duped. Claire, Josh, and now this. Was he destined to lose it all? Michael's pulse raced as he tried to think through his options. Should he pull out of the deal? Should he risk everything to save his business, or was it too late? He leaned back in his chair, staring blankly at the wall. Suddenly, a thought hit him. There was still a chance to salvage something. He needed to confront Claire again. He couldn't let her win. As he dialed her number, his thoughts flashed back to the deal she had presented him with. He'd been desperate, but now he saw how coldly she had manipulated him. The phone rang. When Claire finally answered, her voice was smooth and calm, as if nothing was wrong. "I hope you've had time to think about our conversation, Michael." His words were sharp. "I'm not going down without a fight. We're renegotiating the terms." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "You're making a mistake, Michael. You should have known when to quit." Michael's heart pounded. "I'm not quitting. Not yet." The next morning, Michael met with his team. Everyone gathered in the conference room, their faces filled with uncertainty. He stood at the front, his heart heavy with the burden of the decisions he had made. "We've hit a crossroads," Michael began, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind. "The company is at risk, and we need to move fast. We're going all in on a new strategy. It's a gamble, but it's the only way to survive." The room fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in. "I know this is risky, but if we don't take action now, we lose everything. I'm asking for your trust." His team exchanged glances, unsure but willing to follow him. "Let's do this," one of them said. Michael felt a sense of relief, but it was short-lived. He had made the call, and now he had to live with the consequences. The tension in the room remained, but for the first time in days, Michael felt a glimmer of hope. Michael entered the boardroom, his heart pounding in his chest. Claire, Josh, and the rest of his former team sat around the polished conference table, their faces a mix of disbelief and expectation. He could feel the weight of their stares as he took his seat at the head of the table. The stakes had never been higher, and this meeting would either make or break him. "You think you can just waltz in here and reclaim control?" Claire's voice was sharp, biting. Michael met her gaze, his own eyes cold with resolve. "I'm not here for control, Claire. I'm here to make sure this company survives." His voice was steady, betraying none of the anxiety gnawing at him. "You've played your games and now I'm playing mine. The board is moving in my favor." Josh, looking uncomfortable, glanced at Claire. "You can't do this, Mike. You've already lost." Michael stood up, his voice rising. "I haven't lost, not yet." The room went silent, tension thick in the air. Michael had one shot left, and he was going to take it. As the meeting continued, the conversation grew increasingly heated. Michael felt the pressure mounting with every word exchanged. Claire, ever the strategist, tried to undermine his position at every turn, her voice dripping with contempt. "You're gambling with everyone's future, Michael," she said, her tone mocking. "You'll drag us all down with you." Michael's hands clenched into fists, but he held his ground. "I'm trying to save us, Claire, something you seem incapable of understanding." His eyes flicked to Josh, who remained quiet, a deep sense of guilt written all over his face. "This isn't just about me, it's about all of us. You had your chance, Claire, and now I'm taking control." Claire laughed softly, shaking her head. "You're delusional, Michael. This is over." But Michael's voice cut through the room. "Not yet." He wasn't backing down. Not now, not ever. He could feel the tide beginning to turn in his favor. After the confrontation, Michael retreated to his office, his mind racing. He had fought hard to take back control, but he knew the battle was far from over. As he sat at his desk, he picked up the phone and dialed Henry's number, hoping for some guidance. "Mike, it's done," Henry said as soon as he answered. "You've made your move, but it's not over yet. The real test is coming." Michael's heart sank. "What do you mean?" Henry's voice was serious. "You've burned bridges, Mike. Claire won't back down easily. And Josh, he's already made a deal with her." Michael cursed under his breath. "I knew it. I can't trust anyone." Henry's response was blunt. "You've got to be smarter than this. Don't let your emotions drive you. Take a step back." Michael slammed the phone down in frustration. He had no time for caution. He had to act fast. The following day, Michael met with his team. The room was quiet, the air thick with uncertainty. His team had gathered to hear the next step, but Michael didn't have an easy answer. "I've made some enemies, and the fight is far from over," he said, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. "But we're not backing down." His eyes swept across the room, meeting the gaze of his closest allies. "This is a make-or-break moment. We have to go all in on the next move." Sophia, ever the realist, spoke up. "Are we ready for this? Because if we fail, it's over." Michael took a deep breath, his gaze unwavering. "If we fail together, but I'm not going down without a fight." The room was silent for a moment before someone spoke up. "We're with you, Mike." The support in the room was palpable, but Michael knew it wasn't enough. He had to make the right call, or it would all crumble. Later that night, Michael stood in front of his apartment window, staring out at the city below. His thoughts were a whirlwind of uncertainty and fear. "Is this really the right move?" he muttered to himself. Everything had led to this moment. He had no more second chances. The risk was enormous, but so was the potential reward. As the city lights flickered below him, Michael felt a wave of exhaustion crash over him. He had come so far, but at what cost? The mistakes, the betrayals, they had all led him to this place. "I can't afford to fail," he whispered. Just then his phone buzzed. It was an update on the deal. The results were in. His heart raced as he read the message. There was no turning back now. He had to face the consequences, whatever they were. The morning after the deal went through, Michael found himself standing in the heart of his company's headquarters, the weight of the world on his shoulders. The financial reports on his desk now looked less like a nightmare and more like the possibility of salvation. But salvation was never easy. He stared at the freshly signed contract from his new investors. It wasn't just money. It was control, power, and the final shot at keeping everything he had fought for. As the door opened behind him, Sophia stepped inside. Her expression was one of cautious optimism. "You did it, Mike," she said, her voice soft but filled with relief. Michael didn't respond immediately. The numbers on the report reflected a victory, but deep down, he knew that it was only a temporary fix. "We've got a lot more work ahead of us," he finally said. He could see in her eyes that she understood the price of their victory. "Yeah, but you didn't quit," she replied, offering him a small, genuine smile. Michael couldn't remember the last time he'd felt like this, like there was finally a way out of the dark. The next few days passed in a blur of meetings and phone calls. Michael watched as his company slowly began to recover, but the sense of calm was temporary. One morning, he found himself in the conference room, going over quarterly projections with his team. The numbers were improving, but he couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom. As the team discussed strategies for the next phase, Michael turned to Sophia. "Do you think we're really out of the woods?" he asked, his voice quiet. She didn't hesitate. "We're not there yet, but we're closer than we were yesterday." Michael nodded, but the weight of responsibility was still there. Despite the victories, the sacrifices, and the recovery, something didn't feel right. He thought about the many people he had to let down along the way. His employees, his family, and even himself. "I don't know if I can ever make it right," he admitted, his voice almost a whisper. Sophia met his gaze, her expression unwavering. "You're making it right now. You're still here, Mike. That counts for something." A week later, Michael found himself standing at the entrance of the company's headquarters, looking up at the building that had once been a symbol of his dreams, now a monument to his survival. The past months had been a whirlwind, full of chaos and hard decisions. But as he stood there, something changed inside him. For the first time in a long while, Michael felt like he had a future. The financial crisis had almost consumed him, but now he had fought back. A small group of employees gathered near the entrance, their faces filled with quiet optimism. He walked over to them, his steps measured, as they greeted him with a mix of respect and gratitude. "We did it, Mike," one of them said. A young man in his late 20s with a tired smile. "I didn't think we were going to make it." Michael nodded, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "We're not done yet, but we've made it through the worst." As he looked around at the team, he realized that the true victory wasn't in the financial rebound. It was in the trust and resilience of the people who had stuck with him through it all. Later that evening, Michael found himself alone in his office, the silence deafening. He looked out over the city, his thoughts consumed by the journey he had taken. He had fought, he had lost, but he had also found something more valuable than financial success. He had found his strength. But it wasn't just about him anymore. The company was recovering, but Michael knew that his next challenge would be to rebuild what he had nearly destroyed: his relationships, his family, his friends, and his colleagues. "I can't keep doing this alone," he murmured to himself. Just then his phone rang. It was his brother. "Mike, how's it going?" his brother asked, his voice warm and familiar. Michael smiled, something he hadn't done in a long time. "It's going, man, it's going. But I think I'm ready to get back to what matters." The next morning, Michael stood in front of a mirror, adjusting his tie. He had come a long way since the first day he stepped into the business world. The fight had been long and hard, but he had emerged stronger. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was living. He thought about the lessons he had learned: to trust, to fight, to never back down, and most importantly, to rebuild. The phone rang again. This time it was a call from his investor. "The deal's gone through, Mike. You've done it. The company's back on track." Michael felt a wave of relief wash over him. "Thanks," he replied, his voice steady. "I couldn't have done it without the team." As he hung up the phone, he took one last look in the mirror, a small satisfied smile playing at the corners of his lips. He had made it. And this time, he was ready for whatever came next. Michael's mind raced as he stood outside Claire's office. His last move had felt like a victory, but the taste of success was quickly turning sour. The moment he stepped into her office, he knew something was off. Claire was sitting behind her desk, a smirk playing on her lips. "I knew you'd come crawling back," she said, her tone cold. Michael didn't flinch. "I'm not here for you, Claire. I'm here to end this." He walked toward the desk, the tension between them palpable. Claire's gaze hardened. "You think I've been playing a game? You're the one who's been outplayed, Michael. You and your whole company. You just didn't realize it until now." Michael's heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about?" Claire's lips curved into a cruel smile. "It's over. The deal is off. I've already signed with someone else." Michael felt his stomach drop. Betrayal. The very thing he had feared most. Michael's mind spun as he left Claire's office, the words echoing in his head. He had trusted her, but he had been blind to the truth. He reached for his phone, desperately trying to contact Josh. He needed answers, but Josh's voicemail greeted him. "Mike, I'm sorry, but I had no choice," Josh had said, his voice filled with regret. "It's over. The deal was sealed long ago." The anger surged through Michael, but there was nothing he could do. His once closest ally had just turned on him. The weight of betrayal threatened to crush him. How had he not seen this coming? Everything he had built, everything he had worked for, was slipping through his fingers. As Michael stood on the street, staring up at the building, the realization hit him: he had lost. Not just the deal, but the battle for everything he cared about. With no answers, and nowhere to turn, Michael went back to the office. He had no choice but to confront his team. When he entered the conference room, every eye turned to him. The silence was deafening. Sophia was the first to speak, her voice laced with concern. "What happened, Mike?" she asked, her gaze filled with worry. Michael took a deep breath, running a hand through his hair. "It's over," he said, his voice quiet, almost defeated. "Claire's pulled out and Josh, he's with her. The deal is gone." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of the news sinking in. "What now?" someone finally asked. Michael looked at each of them. "We fight. We can still salvage something." His voice was stronger now, fueled by the rawness of his anger and pain. "I won't let this destroy us." The team nodded, but Michael knew the truth. They were all in this together, but he had led them to the edge. The days following the betrayal were a blur. Michael threw himself into the business, trying to salvage what little he could. But with each passing day, the pressure grew. The creditors were calling, the investors were losing faith, and his employees were growing restless. One afternoon, he found himself in a quiet corner of the office, staring at a financial report. The numbers were bleak. Everything he had worked for was hanging by a thread. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. Sophia entered, her face unreadable. "We need to talk, Mike," she said, her voice firm. Michael didn't look up. "Not now, Sophia. I'm trying to fix this." She walked over, standing beside him. "Mike, you're losing yourself. You can't keep going like this." Michael finally looked up, meeting her eyes. "I don't know what else to do, Sophia. It's falling apart." Sophia placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then we figure it out. Together." Michael walked into the office the next morning, the weight of the world still pressing down on him. The walls felt like they were closing in, but there was a strange sense of clarity now. He had nothing left to lose, and that made him more dangerous than ever. As he entered the conference room, the team was already there, waiting. "I've made some tough decisions," he began, his voice steady. "But we're not done yet." Sophia, Josh, and the others looked at him, their faces a mixture of uncertainty and determination. "We may have lost a lot, but we haven't lost everything," he continued. "And as long as we have something left, we fight. We rebuild." Michael's words were met with a quiet nod from the team. For the first time in days, Michael felt a spark of hope. He wasn't out of options yet. The war wasn't over, not as long as he was still standing. Weeks passed, and Michael's world began to stabilize. The weight of the betrayals still lingered, but the financial damage had been repaired. The office, which once felt like a battlefield, now seemed like a place of quiet determination. Michael sat at his desk, looking out the window at the city skyline, his mind drifting back to the chaos that had defined his life for the past year. Everything had changed, but some things, like his desire to succeed, had remained the same. His phone buzzed, bringing him back to the present. It was Sophia. "We need to talk," she texted. He picked up the phone and dialed her number, his fingers moving almost mechanically. "What's up?" he asked when she answered. "The team's ready, Mike. We've got a plan to rebuild the company stronger than before, but we need you to lead." Michael took a deep breath. "I'm ready," he replied, a newfound sense of purpose in his voice. The storm had passed, but now was the time to rebuild, and he would do it with everything he had left. That afternoon, Michael met with his core team. The tension in the room was palpable, but it was different this time. There was hope in the air. Sophia stood at the head of the conference table, her presence commanding attention. "We've learned a lot, and now it's time to put that knowledge to work," she said, her voice steady. Michael stood beside her, his confidence growing. "We have a chance to rebuild. We can't undo the past, but we can control the future." The team nodded, a shared sense of purpose filling the room. As the meeting progressed, ideas flowed, strategies were discussed, and plans were put into motion. It was clear that the team was united. Despite the betrayals, despite the failures, they were in this together. Michael's heart swelled with pride. The journey ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he wasn't alone. The road to recovery had just begun. As the days passed, Michael began to realize just how much had changed. Not only was the company on the path to recovery, but so was he. The emotional scars from the betrayals and the endless struggles began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of resolve. One evening, Michael found himself in the quiet of his office once more. The city outside sparkled under the night sky, and for the first time in a long while, he felt at peace. He sat at his desk, staring at the company's updated financial reports. They were better than he had hoped. The investments were paying off, and his team was firing on all cylinders. As he looked over the numbers, he couldn't help but think back to his father's words. "Success is earned, not given." Michael smiled softly, realizing that he had earned every ounce of his success. He wasn't just the survivor of a financial collapse, he was the architect of his own redemption. Months later, Michael stood in the same conference room, but this time it was filled with a sense of triumph. The room was no longer filled with tension, but with the hum of progress. "We've come a long way," he said to his team, a sense of pride in his voice. "What we've built together is stronger than ever, and we're just getting started." The room erupted in applause. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. Michael looked around at the faces of the people who had stood by him through it all, and for the first time in months, he allowed himself to believe in the future again. He knew the road ahead would still have its challenges, but for the first time in a long time, Michael had hope. Hope for the company, for his team, and for himself. As Michael left the office for the final time that day, he stood on the steps of the building, looking out at the city. The evening sky was painted with hues of purple and orange, signaling the end of another day. He had learned a lot over the past year, about business, about betrayal, and about himself. But, more importantly, he had learned that redemption wasn't just about fixing financial mistakes, it was about rebuilding trust, relationships, and self-worth. As he walked away from the building, a quiet sense of peace washed over him. The journey had been long, but he had made it. And as the city lights flickered behind him, Michael realized that he was no longer the man who had walked into this world broken and desperate. He was someone new, someone stronger, someone ready for whatever came next.